welcome. Again, like Robert and Brad said as well, too, it's great to see familiar faces, some new faces, meet in person, drink beer. I told Johan and Joris yesterday that maybe we should have the beer drinking session in the morning. So my session is about native script transactions that are coming in 19.6, so in the next release. And every dot release has been like a major release in some sense, because there's some compelling new feature that is coming. And script transactions is a major new feature. And it's exciting to finally have this capability in FileMaker Pro and on server, on the platform. So it's going to be great to see what people actually build with it. A little bit about me. I started off in Montreal. That's my native town where I was born and raised. My parents were Italian, so I speak Italian, French, and English. Learned a little bit of German. I'm the author of Inspector Pro. We have a discount code if anybody wants to participate. It's 30% off for all the attendees here. Good till the end of the year. Thank you. I've been with Beeswax almost coming up on 20 years. That's a long time. And Beeswax has grown over the 20 years I've been there. We were 5 people when I joined, and Jay just told me that we're breaking 100 people just recently. So it's incredible. We have Christos, who's on our team, and we have Ben, who's also on our team, who are here. But so we have over 500 clients. We have over 1,500 projects that we've worked on. We do FileMaker work. We're part of we're Claris partners. We're also partners in the Tableau community, and we do a lot of cool things with the integration of Tableau and FileMaker. We do integration work with web, and there's a whole bunch of other things that we do. But there's a blog. There's some really cool things that are posted on our blog. I invite you to check it out. There's some great blogs from our web developers, from our FileMaker developers, our Tableau developers. And sometimes I do blogs about FileMaker and Tableau. It's a very exciting thing to combine those two platforms. There's a great blog post recently by Steve Sentfit Herrera, who did a couple of blog posts about OData. So if you're interested, they're great blogs about that. Things that I like architecture, I like sharp knives, I like electric bikes, data visualization, precision engineering, and hiking and traveling. I have 2 kids, and they're getting bigger and older. My son just turned 14. My daughter's turning 10 next week. So they keep me very busy and young. So I was in Montreal, and in Montreal, sometimes I notice things when I travel, and you know, it's kind of like what we pay attention to when we interview people to hire them. We pay attention to see if people pay attention to details. And I noticed I was parking. So the picture on your right is a parking lot. And normally you see in parking lots you see handicap signs, but there's a sign on the floor there that says like, this is a family parking. Someone had to think about that, like little details like that. So it's easier, more convenient for families. And this other picture is a sink at, I think it was at the airport in Rome. There's a sink, the height for kids. Someone had to think about that. Like, it's not convenient for kids to wash their hands up here, you know? Little details. So with that, I'm going to break over to one of my favorite videos, and we'll share that, and then we'll get started. So here. Hope audio, you'll hear it.
Questions and your responses.
Can you hear it?
And we'll be recording. Any questions?
What's your first name?
My first name is Bob.
Shoot, Bob.
Right.
Name as many mammals as you can in 60 seconds. Ready? Go.
60 seconds. Well, how would you like that? How about alphabetical? Aardvark, baboon, caribou, dolphin, eel, hippus, fox, gorilla, hyena, ibex, jackal, kangaroo, lion, marmoset, Newfoundland, ocelot, panda, rat, sloth, tiger, unicorn, varmint, whale, yak, zebra. Now, varmint is a stretch, so is Newfoundland. That's a dog breed. Unicorn is mythical, Eohippus is prehistoric, but you aren't being very specific now, were you, Bob?
I'll try to be more specific. You ready for the next one?
Shoot.
Answer as quickly as you can. How old is a person born in 1928?
Man or woman?
Why?
Specifics, Bob.
Okay, one more time. How old is a man born in 1928?
Still alive?
If a man is born in 1928 and he's still alive, how old is he?
What month?
If a man was born October 3rd, 1928, and he's still alive, how old is he?
What time?
10 o'clock p.m.
Where?
Anywhere.
Well, let's get specific, Bob. I mean, if the guy's still alive, born in California, October 3rd, 1928, 10 p.m., he's 67 years, 9 months, 22 days, 14 hours, and 12 minutes. If he's born in New York, he's 3 hours older now, isn't he?
So, so I show this video to new clients that we're going to do work for, and I kind of tell them that what's going to happen is we're going to ask you a lot of questions, and we're going to be very specific about things. So it's just a way to have that break the ice with the client to tell them, like, what you're going to do with them. You're going to want to ask them a lot of questions. And so I kind of I like to show that video. It's one of my favorite videos. It's from the movie Phenomenon with John Travolta, and so it breaks the ice with them. Okay, so I have done 2 other talks. They're kind of leading up to what we're talking about today, but this was done last year, and so you can you have the slides. You can go look those 2 talks up. So with native script transactions, if there's anything you remember from this talk, will be at least these 4 points. 1, the potential for it is to simplify your code and to improve solution performance potentially, depending on how you build it or architect it. The other thing is some things that, while this was an ETS, this wasn't discussed very much, but I feel it's extremely important, and we're all going to have to kind of tackle this issue, which is direct editing versus indirect editing, and I'll cover that and what's the implications of that, because it's script transactions. It's not user transactions, which means you don't turn on a switch and then you can go and do things and then say save. You have to have it all within the scope of a script. And then the other thing that's going to be interesting challenge for us is if you want to improve solution performance, one of the ways is to move unstored calcs to stored calcs. And with embracing script transactions, all the records that are created or modified during the transactions are not within the scope of aggregate functions. So you won't have the ability to just do an auto enter and say, count me the tasks that I have for this project, etc., once you created all those task records. So that's something to really keep in mind on how you architect systems. And for most systems, I think eventual integrity is okay. But I think for some systems, even the fact that there's a potential, a very small potential, that you could have a situation where you have the transaction and then you find the records and update them, so the aggregation of the records of the data that you put in is aggregated at a higher level, is accurate. If there's a potential that those records could be locked and you can't get to them, then your transaction isn't a transaction, especially for financial systems. That's really, really critical. Okay, so in a previous session when I talked about this, I talked about these 2 points, direct versus indirect later. So I moved them to the front because they're the most important things to consider. So let's look at, what we're going to do is we're going to have a refresher about transactions. How many of you here know how transactions work already in FileMaker? Okay, all of you. So I'll go really quickly through that. We'll talk about direct versus indirect. We'll talk about FileMaker aggregation. We'll talk about script transactions quite a bit, some things to pay attention to, etc. We have also in 19.6, when it comes out, we have a new get function. It's called get UTC microseconds. And Hansa and his team will love that one. But it's really great. You can measure really up to the millionths of a second, so you can put it into your scripts and you can see how performant it is, especially with some of these newer machines, Apple Silicon machines. They're incredibly fast, and FileMaker runs really well on them. And so it's great to have the ability to measure at a finer precision, and you discover some interesting things about what's going on under the hood. Well, then we'll do a recap. Okay, so for all the examples I'm going to talk about, very simple. I'm just going to have like a project and a set of tasks. So you can imagine it's just really like, okay, I have 3 or 4 tasks. I have a count of tasks, or I have a sum of tasks at the project level, etc. So it's a very simple example that you'll see scripting for, and it's based off of this model. And so just, again, these are the 2 videos that I talked about. Just a refresher again, and for those people who might not know about transactions natively in FileMaker. So if you have like a project and you have a task and you edit the task in a portal, you automatically lock the parent record. With that knowledge, the community started, Todd Geist championed or pioneered this. He said, okay, well, what if you have a transaction record and you put in a key there, you can relate to a project, and you could edit the project. And so then you can put another key in another field and another relationship to a task, and you can edit that task, and so on and so forth, right? So as long as you don't commit the transaction record, everything is in a state of flux, okay? Until you say, okay, I want to commit my transaction record, and by committing that transaction record, everything gets committed at the same time. So take that a step further, and instead of putting it in separate fields, you put it in a single field. So you take the ID of the project, you put it in, you have access to the project. You wipe that key, you put in a task key, and because they're all UUIDs, they're unique, they can point to different things, and now you're pointing to a task record through a portal, etc. And the same idea applies here, right? So eventually, once you've you put all your keys in there and you've pointed to the records, on commit, you've committed all your changes. So the beauty of this is that one of the things in the graph, and Clay often points out that loading the graph takes work. And so to simplify the graph in our solutions is always a good thing. One of the things that transactions will bring is this is a before and this is an after. So all of a sudden, like 1/5 of my graph is going to be gone, because I don't have to have all those portals and relationships for dealing with transactions. I can just do what you natively do in scripting with FileMaker, which is go to layout, find this record, edit this record, create a record, go to another layout. So just the native behavior of what you do in FileMaker will give you the ability to have that in a state that's in a transaction block. So big savings on the graph, so you have less code to build and maintain. So direct editing versus indirect editing. And so I want to ask, how many of you, when you build your solutions, build solutions that people can actually edit the record directly? Like they go into a field, they lock the record, and they're making changes. Okay, so how many of you use indirect editing? And what I mean by that, okay, so maybe half. I'm going to encourage you that if you want to embrace script transactions, indirect editing might be something you want to think about. And so direct editing, the user locks the record, server holds a lock on that user until the user commits their changes. No other user can make changes on that record. So FileMaker's pessimistic record locking. So nobody else can make changes until that user releases that lock. If you measure the time it takes for that open record, make the change and commit it over a WAN, we would see that it is much faster, more efficient to send the data, transact it on the server, and then you see that difference in performance is dramatic. And we can measure all this, and I'm not going to get into much detail, but there's something called release debug flags that you can turn on, and you can set those and then go and look at the release debug output and see what's going on with the communication with client and server. And so you can learn about all the network traffic that's happening for that and how long it takes. Whereas if a user wants to make more than one change to a record, right, so they want to change, let's say, all the tasks of a project and the project at the same time, you'll have to use script triggers to control that. And then, so it gets messy because you might want to also pause the script because it has to be within the scope of the script. So it's not something that I think as a team we would like to kind of support and maintain. This can be done and the complexity grows, and it will be reflected here too. So remember, these are script transactions. Okay, so indirect editing, instead of making the changes to the record directly, there's different ways you can do this in the past. You can just have a pop over, you put the value in a global, etc. So before we send it to the server, we'll grab that value that the person put into, let's say, a global, and then we'll send it to the server and we'll transact it there. Okay, so the performance difference is dramatic, especially on a WAN. Okay, and so a few ways to do this. Again, some global fields. That's what we used before, and now what we've kind of settled on or landed on is we have this approach called local file editing. And so what we do is, and there's an example a small example that I posted up on the download area, so you can take a look at. Basically, it's a file that's inside a container, and that file gets deployed when your user opens the solution. And so when the user opens the solution, it outputs this file, and it's got schema in it about your tables or whatever data you want the user to be able to edit or create. And a local file reference is created to that file, maybe in the temp directory or whatever. It has no records other than the records that you put in there when the user edits a record or creates a record. And so that's one way, and we'll show an example here. And then the other way is that using web techniques or web viewer and doing it all with web. So we felt that keeping it all within FileMaker was a lot simpler and easier for all our devs to kind of get their heads around it. And it's more work if you do it over a web viewer, but you have a lot more capabilities. So deploying a local file, here's a script for it. It's just a few lines of code, and it's really easy to deploy. We don't export it. We use the FileMaker file creation options to write out the file. And the reason for that is normally these files are very small. And what's cool about it is with export, you get a dialog if it's slow to download the file, whatever. With these steps, you don't even see the dialog. So you just, it writes out the file, and then it creates a variable file reference. And now the beauty of this is just like FileMaker has a local cache, you now have your own local cache, right? So you can create records, or you want to look at a project and you want to edit it. You press a button, you talk to that, you go to that layout that is based on a table from that local file, and then you put the record in there with all the data that comes from the current record. And now you have a local copy of that record. And the beauty of it is there's no network traffic at all. It's all local. So you can create records, delete records, edit records. There's no network traffic. So you've saved a lot on communication back and forth to the server. And so on the graph, you'll end up having a table occurrence, and that table occurrence comes from the local file. And so it's a lot simpler to do. And what you're seeing here on the left is a layout, and that layout has could be anywhere. Now you introduce a card, and that card is based on a layout that is coming from a table occurrence that's coming from the local file, which you see at the top. So you're actually in the hosted file, but you're actually creating a record on the local file. So it's really kind of cool. That's really cool. All right, so let's look at some ways to measure performance. And this is something that Carl from Solion posted, which I think is really great. Some of you might use speed test and you measure your latency, et cetera, on the network. But this is actually going to measure and give you the latency right back to the server. So, and this is doing 10 tests. I think Carl said even with 5 or fewer, you can still get an accurate measurement of the performance of your latency back to the server. So I was in Rome when I did this, and the server was in California. So I had like a quarter of a second latency back to California, okay? And so 6,000 plus miles. So ever since COVID, we're all on a WAN. We're all working on a WAN. And you have to address the performance issues that you will have in your solutions. So this is, I'm measuring this transaction. Okay, so again, the transaction is from open transaction to commit transaction. So that's the transaction block. And the beauty of it is just like if and loop, it's nested, so you see it there. I wish that we could collapse these different things so we could have further kind of overview of our scripts and stuff, but we don't have that ability right now. You can? Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so if you measure the different parts of this, so if you measure A, which is the transaction block itself, and once the commit happens, that data that's in there, so you've created a record for project, you've created a task record, and you've committed those 2 records. You can measure. And then the other thing to address this idea of like, how do I say, not having the ability to do aggregation within a transaction, one potential solution might be that you could right away open up the project record again and calculate your aggregated total of like the sum of total tasks at that time, and we can measure the amount of time it takes from A to B to do that, et cetera, and then how much time it actually takes to commit that piece as well. So using the release debug flags and looking at the data there, like the over a WAN, it's incredibly slow. It's incredibly slow. That means that record or those records would be locked for any other user, whereas over PSOS, it's locked momentarily. And the beauty of it is it's locked momentarily. The server has less work to do if other users are needing to edit that record or whatever, because it's locked for a very short amount of time. And then B is the commit time to reopen the record and make the change so that you can get your change in there for aggregation. Again, this is like an example of addressing the aggregation issue so that you can do it, but this is like eventual integrity. So there is a potential that, between that commit that you just did in the transaction and getting in there, someone else might sneak in and lock the project record, and then you're kind of out of luck. But anyway, you can see the measurements here, and they point to like a lot faster to do this on the server than it is to do it locally. And just to give you a visual representation of how long that takes. Okay, so this is how many transactions that you could do if you were doing it PSOS versus on the WAN. So over the WAN, you would, or on PSOS, you could do 149 of those transactions in the time that you do one. Okay, so that's kind of really burning in this idea that like over a WAN, it's not a good idea to lock the records directly. You really want to kind of use the metaphor of like, just like an address book. You want to edit an address record, you go to edit, and then you have like some ability to go into that record. It's stored in memory until you say save. So that's a very important point to bring up. And again, these are using the data output from db.log. And PSOS, there's 1 call to the server versus 8 for the WAN version of it. And it's like they have the number of bytes transferred and the elapsed time and duration that it took. So very, very impressive. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to the mechanics of the new script transaction, and we'll talk about some of the things to pay attention to there. So first off, there's 3 new script steps. open transaction, revert transaction, and commit transaction. And there's a transaction scope, so like it's within that block. That's your transaction block. And then basically it's all or nothing. So if during the transaction you had certain types of errors, either data errors, validation errors, or security errors, the transaction will be auto-aborted, okay? And there's some things that you can do, and things are still not completely settled, and there's still changes going on, but that's the basic idea. And the beauty is, again, it's nested, okay? And so when you revert a transaction, there's an optional calculation with a Boolean result. So empty or true will revert, will execute revert, and it will jump to the commit transaction step, and it will be reverted, okay? False or 0 will execute the step, but no reverting will take place, okay? So it will not jump to the commit transaction step and just step over it and continue on with the script, and hopefully if there's no other errors, then it will commit. The other important point is that it's single window only. So when you start, a transaction happens in the window that exists when the open transaction step is executed. So that means that in this script example here, this new window script step is going to create a new record after it, but in a new window. If the new window is introduced, anything that happens in that window afterwards is not within the transaction scope. So what happens in the end when this transaction is, not, let's say it's not reverted, let's say it gets reverted, what you end up with is, in this example, the project record would be removed and the task record would remain, because the task record was created in a new window. So it's a very important point to remember, okay? Only one transaction can run at a time. So if a user is running a transaction, there's a new get function. It's called get transaction open state. Sorry, that's a typo. And that transaction function will return true if currently there is an open transaction, and 0 or false if there is none. Truncate table. Okay, in this case, what happens here? Truncate table will remove the records, but they cannot be reverted. So what'll happen is if you go to a table and you truncate the records, and then you further down you have a revert condition, those records are gone. You can't undo that. Okay, and there's some reasons for that, but instead you can use delete all records, and delete all records will then delete all the records, but if you then later decide to change your mind and you want to revert it, those records will come back. Okay? So something I learned as I was doing this is that based on validation, the behavior will be different if you're doing validation for changes that apply to a field versus validation for things that only can get validated when the record is committed. So if you say, I want to do validation that the value has to be unique in this field, well, it doesn't know that until you're going to commit the record. So the behavior is slightly different when you're dealing with on-record commit validation options than field validation options. So like in this example, if we say that the strict data type is number, and we have a transaction that sets this field to some character string, which is not number, when the script is executed, number does not meet the validation entry options. It jumps to the commit transaction step, okay? And when that step is executed, it returns, number value does not meet validation entry options, and appended to the end in the script debugger, you'll see the script name and the step number where that error occurred, okay? If, on the other hand, only during data entry option is checked. So these two also affect like whether you have always validate or only during data entry, and there's a subtle difference between that. Is always will always validate, and it will be very strict, and you'll get the auto abort options to run, etc. And only during data entry will not kind of auto abort the transaction. So no validation is performed, the record gets created with invalid data, and the script continues, and no errors are returned. So again, there's a difference between on field change and on record commit options here. And so those are going to be behaving differently. So if on the other hand you have a unique validation, in this case here, what happens is the budget is set to 32. So, but I have another record where I have a budget of 32. So in that case, the script will just continue because I have the option to only during data entry. And those other steps will oh, sorry, I stand corrected. It doesn't do the validation yet because it only happens on commit. Okay, so it will step through the other steps. And when the commit transaction step is executed, then at that time, it realizes like, oh, I'm about to commit this record, but it's going to fail the validation options. And so then it will abort. Okay, you have a question, Fabrice? Yes. You want it right now? You want to do it right now? Sure, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
If you just change the record during your transaction, so that would usually commit if you were not in a transaction. Would that?
If you change the record?
Yes, if you go to another record, for instance.
Oh, I see. Go to another record.
Whatever. Would that trigger the validation?
I haven't tested that actually. I'm not sure, but because it's not doing any commits right until the end, so I think it won't do it. It won't do it. But that's a good thing to test. And there's a lot of different scenarios that I think as a community we'll end up having to test because until you get your hands on it and all of us as a community start building really complex systems with transactions, I think we're not going to uncover like all the subtleties and differences. For example, Alec on our team pointed out that like you could have a single pass loop. And so loop is just like an indented structure. And you can have within it or outside of it, I think it's outside of it, you have the transaction. Now you have your single pass loop, and then you say, I want to exit my loop, but you exit outside of the transaction, right? So that, what is that behavior? So there is some knowledge in the script transaction to know that now I'm outside my transaction block, I'm just going to abort, right? So there's all these kinds of different scenarios that we'll encounter as a community that we'll have to see how it goes. I mean, I don't think there's been enough testing, honestly, to really understand what the implications of this are. So, okay. Let's see. So here's another interesting one. So if you look at this script, right, over here, down here, there's a set field and it's missing. So what do you think is going to happen here? Do you think the script will abort because it's trying to set a field that's missing, and so that's going to be, data that's not valid, it's not going to get in there, or will it just continue? How many say it will continue? How many say it will abort? Okay, so the continue people are right, because what happens is it'll give you an error, but that error is not going to abort the transaction. It's a schema error. So you argue, well, it should be an error, whatever, but your code is wrong. So, use a tool like Inspector or any other favorite tool. Yes, you have a question. Can you use the microphone? So that,
Sorry, boom out.
Sorry.
What errors do and don't trigger it? Because I was thinking there something like a 401. If I'm looking to see if there's already an existing record, I get a 401. Will that kill it or?
So validation and security. Those are the main two things that will trigger it. And we'll have other examples that are errors, but that will not get you out of the transaction and auto abort. So that's one of them. Okay, so field is missing. Execution will continue when the transaction commit step is executed. Records get created, but the string plan doesn't get put anywhere. Okay. So that's going to be an error in your solution. But so set field by name. So where is that step? Let's see. Oh yeah, up here, set field by name, right? So I don't have a field called blah blah, right? So what's going to happen here? It's going to auto abort or continue? Auto abort? Continue? Yeah, okay, so you're getting the hang of it. So when script is executed, it says, okay, you have an error there. I can't set that field. I don't know what it is. But I'm just going to continue with the rest of the script and commit it. So again, you have to understand that your solution is sound, doesn't have problems, and that you've coded it right. It doesn't take those problems into consideration. Okay, so how about this one? Will it auto abort or will it continue? Auto abort? Okay, continue? All right, so you have a schema problem. You have a layout. It doesn't know where to go. You have other problems on your hand because you're going to create another record in the project table, etc., right? Because it's not going to go to that layout. Execution will continue, right? And so again, use the tool. But yeah, so it'll commit that data, but your integrity of your solution has got a problem. Okay, so we have security here. So now in the middle of my transaction, I'm going to go and create an account. For whatever reason, I need to create an account record for somebody. Let's say I put a person record in a person table, and now I want to create an account for that person and all that. So let's say I'm creating this account, and that account already exists. It's going to return an error, right? It's going to say, hey, I can't create an account. That account already exists, like a FileMaker account. What do you think it's going to do? Continue or auto abort? Continue? Okay. Auto abort? Okay, so no auto abort. It'll just continue. Because this is not within the scope of data. This is security. However, it's not security with regards to data. It's you're going to create an account, name already exists, execution will continue. Okay? If you don't use the set error capture and you're running it on a client, you'll get this dialog, etc. All right. Here's an interesting one. So there's all these open managed database, open script window, open layouts, whatever. I don't know why you would ever want to put these in the middle of your script. Maybe there's a reason. So like you're running a transaction, then you say, I want to edit my saved finds, okay? And some of these are modal and some of them are not. Some of them can run at the same time, and you can get to the script and continue. So some of them are modal, some of them are not. And so it's worthwhile exploring what this has implications to. So this dialog is opened. Script is suspended. It's floating there, like like a little bit like the technique that Mark Scott and John Renfrew pioneered with the script in the middle, where you launch a script on timer, and then you put a card window, but that script is on the other window, so it's waiting to run, but it can't run because the window's in front, and all this stuff, right? So the script is suspended, and then when you close the saved finds dialog, the script will continue, right? When the dialog is dismissed, the script continues. Now, I presented this internally to our team, and Jason Erickson, some of you that may know him from Syntec, he's working with us a little bit now. And he kind of thought about it. He said, wait a minute, can you put open managed database there? And it's like, you can get the list of fields before and the list of fields after. What could you do with that? So like, it's interesting, and I don't know if that is something that you'd want to do and all that, but again, I don't know what use case would be there for putting these dialogues in the middle of a script transaction, because all script steps are, open game. Some of them will not do anything. Like if you put a commit step inside here, it will just be disregarded because that commit step at the commit transaction is the one that rules for the script block, not commit records. It doesn't do anything. Okay, so again, open managed database, the script is executed. The dialog comes up, the script is suspended, right? So you can imagine situations where it's like, what can I do with that? All right. And there's a whole bunch of them to explore, right? So again, I don't know the use cases for why you would use these in a script transaction, but nonetheless, they're there. So there's two new options that we're still not kind of fully baked or functioning just yet. And these ones are, skip data entry validation. This was so new that when I was in Rome, I didn't get enough time to test this, and it isn't working properly just yet. So we're hoping in the next build to understand how it works and basically. But those two options are there. And I want to point out that a lot of the ETS activity, some of you are on ETS, I've never seen the ETS community actively participating, and Claris so actively kind of taking the feedback and say, you know what, we hear you, we'll look at it, and they made a lot of changes. They made a lot of changes. When they introduced script transactions, these options were not there. The calculation option for revert transaction wasn't there. That's a byproduct of us as a community saying, hey, we need this and we need that and all that. So I've never seen the community and Claris working so well together to help make it better. I did talk to one of the engineers, and a lot of the discussion was like, can't we make this like, try catch, and all this? But try catch, from what I was told, is very different and needs to be done very differently than what open transaction is. They're two separate things. And there's a lot of engineering effort that it needs on its own, so you can't really squeeze them in together. But they're listening, and it's really great to see that participation. Okay, so again, I don't have a lot of answers to this because I haven't tested it, but it's there. And then on the revert transaction, all of these are calculations, and you have some new things that are here as well, not just the calculation, but you have some custom error codes that you can put into your solution. So you have explicitly calling script transaction can now return customizable error codes and error messages for custom error numbers between 5,000 and 5,499. So this is interesting. Alec experimented with this a little bit. I haven't, but this is brand new, and so we'll see how the community makes use of this. But basically, there's ways to return custom codes and that we can write what those codes mean, etc. And so that's what's also new that came about from the participation in the ETS. And there's two new get functions, get last error detail and get last error location. And those have the potential to give you more insight into your errors when they happen. So here's a slide that talks about simplifying code. So normally, this is not the most elegant example, but it's kind of like an example to represent like, okay, if I go to this layout and I get an error, I want to trap for the error, I want to exit my script or exit my loop, my single pass loop. If I got that error, I want to create a record. If I get an error, getting that record, then, this code versus this code, which one is easier to read? Right? So it's a little bit easier to read the one on the right because it's almost like pseudocode. Like go to this layout, create a record, create, this stuff, right? And so maybe we can get to a point where we can rely on script transactions to make sure that the data gets entered, security is valid, and your code is cleaner. So in the end, it simplifies your code, better longevity for your code. So like if developers understand it, they're not going to rewrite it. Like, what the crap is this? I can't understand it. I'm going to just rewrite it. Right? It's less code to execute, so it runs faster, less code to maintain in the long term, and it's easier to read and understand. So I didn't give some examples of security, but here's an example where with a privilege set, I don't have the ability to create a record. So in that case, in the project table, I have a new record step, right? So when that step is executed, right, it will jump to the commit transaction step because it can't create a record in that table. So it's going to auto abort from there, okay? And so it returns 200, record access is denied, and then appended to the end of it, if you're in the script debugger, you can get the script name and the step number. Okay, let's see. So if you use those two functions that I was pointing out to before, depending where you use them, there's subtle differences with these. You will get back the name of the script, the step, and the step number. Okay? So in this case, the script name is new projects security test, and then the record is, the step number, which is the step, which is new record request, and then the step number, which in this case it's wrong because it should have been 6. The screenshot must have been taken when I removed step 1 or something. So, but if you commit the transaction, sometimes you will get the step number of the commit transaction because the transaction itself failed. So that's where the error occurred, but you'll get that step number. But however, the step above it was the one that got an error. So there's subtle differences on, like the example I was giving before, which is only on commit do you get the error. So like you don't know that step when you set that value is supposed to have a unique value. So in that case, it would have failed there, but you're getting the step failure at the commit step. So it's something to be experimented with and see how you put that, because you could put it right after the steps, but that then inflates your code because then you're checking for everything also. And sometimes it's going to step over that step, right? Because it's going to do auto abort. So you're not going to get your code executed. So that's the other thing. Like, okay, well, I have the checking, but that's the thing that we argued about in ETS, right? It's not going to go and do the validation that you want it to do because it has this auto abort mandate, you know? You have a question? Yeah, can you use the microphone? Yes.
Just to understand, if you have multiple errors, field errors, it will just continue. But how if you don't collect these errors, as you did in your left example, and the get last error will always only get the last error, not get all the other errors happened during the script. So how do you collect them easily?
So like if you have, let's say they're all validation errors, and you want one field to be number, one field to be date, and you get to the first one, and it's supposed to be number, but it's not number, right? It's going to auto abort immediately. You're not going to get another error, right? So it's just going to go there, go to the commit step, and then when it exits there, it's going to tell you like, hey, I got an error at step 7 because I auto aborted. In some cases, it will not auto abort because it has to wait till commit the data, because only then could it know that validation has to be unique, and only at the time of commit does it know that that validation failed. But then it doesn't really point you to where it is, you know? And then in those cases, you know, you could have validation on a project table, you could have validation on a task table, you could have multiple errors, right? So then it you know, that's the thing that as a community we're gonna have to explore and see what happens. I don't know, I haven't tested all those permutations, but yeah. So on some errors it will auto abort, on some you'll have to wait till you get to the end. Most of the time, hopefully, it will, you know, it'll be things where you'll want it to auto abort and then deal with it. But anyway, everybody's way of designing solutions is different and unique, and so it'll be interesting for people who've developed frameworks where they built like we have like a framework at Beeswax called Focus, and we used to use all the portals and all that's gone away now, and now we're using script transactions. So we have like a JSON kind of manifest or a payload that we send, and based on that, it does its work, right? So we'll see how it goes with more of our testing. Okay. Yeah, so you'll get last error detail and get last error location may behave slightly differently depending on auto abort conditions. Security again, so I have no access to this field, right? And I'm trying to set the field, but I don't have access to it. So again, what we've seen in this case, is it going to auto abort or is it going to continue? So auto abort, Auto abort, continue. Okay, so it will auto abort because it's security and you don't have access to that field. So field cannot be modified, right? So it will jump to the commit transaction step in the debugger. When the commit transaction step is executed, you'll get this, and then you'll get the script name and step number, in that case, telling you like, okay, I had an error here and I can't commit the transaction because it's a security validation failure. So, okay. So recap. So again, we went through a little bit of a refresher as to, you know, how we've been doing transactions up till today, right? So Todd Geist and many of us who've used it, you know and piggyback off of the natural ability that FileMaker has, like when you're locking, editing a record, you're locked it, and if you're editing a related record, you lock the parent as well. And based on all that, this is the thing that we've been using for all these years, right? And so then we talked about direct editing versus indirect editing. I hope I've convinced you of the benefits of using indirect editing potentially, and there's an easy way to do it. I love it because not only can you just, you're not looking at just a record, you can actually build a whole view of like the project and the related tasks in a portal and all that in a card view, and all those records are being edited locally. So. And it's really easy because it's all just pure FileMaker. FileMaker aggregation functions, something that you will need to think about and address, and hopefully there'll be, some community consensus on how to do things here. But I've been experimenting with Clara Studio, and Clara Studio is optimistic record locking because I can be in the record in the Excel view on the browser, and I can be in the record in FileMaker, and I'm editing the same record, but Claris doesn't complain, and you can do it, and who wins is whoever gets there first or last. So it's a very different world. But again, for integrity, you have to know that sometimes you must have transactional integrity versus eventual integrity, and know the difference. We talked a lot about script transactions and the subtleties of what you're going to have to pay attention to. New window, it's only in the scope of a window. It's only data and security that will auto abort it, and still there's a lot. As a community, when we start building sophisticated solutions with script transactions, some things that we'll continue to learn there. Simplifying your code can be something that we can benefit from that. And again, if you can address the aggregation issue, and you can move away from unstored calcs to stored calcs, I've seen some dramatic differences in performance. So like denormalizing data, so like if you have a list view of projects and you show one field that is the aggregate total of tasks, on a WAN, you're not only pulling the projects down, for every single one of those projects, you're pulling down each of the task records to get a total of the count of tasks that you have for each one of the projects. Once you store that calc on the project table, there's no longer this other need to go fetch all those other task records. It's just a list of records. It's just a list of data. And that, it does it very efficiently. I will add that over the years, FileMaker has been improving the way data is cached. So, there's a whole discussion about, cache and how that's valid for up to 14 days. And so, like, if you go in, a perfect example is if you go into a solution the first time and then log into it again, you'll notice a dramatic difference in just even logging in, because it's cached a lot of the information. Okay, and it does that also with data. Your data is also cached if the record hasn't changed. And then there's a lot of other features in 19.6. This is just the surface of like, there's a whole bunch of other things that I haven't talked about. That's not the scope of this discussion. But one of my favorite new features is get UTC milliseconds. It's microseconds, I should say. Sorry, yeah, so microseconds. Yeah, that's it. this is me. This is how you can get a hold of me, and we have time for a few questions. Yes. Thank you.
I was just going to say one of the ETS features that I was disappointed fell off was the running PSOS from inside PSOS, because I thought that was a way around the new window in the transactions that you could just spin off another PSOS session with your other script, which is a transaction, and if that failed, I could then come back and conditionally kill it, but it didn't seem to survive very long.
Again, to the point that the dialogue between the community and Claris, it got to a point where it's not ready. Let's pause it. So that's another perfect example of Claris listening and saying let's rethink this, and then when it's ready, it'll come back.
But in the answer to your question about, I think we will end up with a hybrid solution. We will come back with a hybrid solution, because there will be errors, as you say, that are our errors and not valid data errors or security errors, where I don't want a project called Simon or something. And you'll have to have those error checking all the way through. It'll just be a hybrid thing.
Again, there are tools out there that can check your solution for those errors where the code isn't right, whatever. So that's when I learned it. It was what is it called? Programmatic errors and execution errors, or whatever the difference, right? And so or logical errors, etc. And so you can also build conditions in your revert transaction step that says, hey, if the budget exceeds this amount, I want to abort the transaction, right? So you have a lot of flexibility there as well. But yes, it's that fine line between I hate writing code that is so verbose, and it's oh man, I can't. What is this doing again? Where am I? It's not me, but then again, I don't write that much code these days. Yes. Oh,
yes. Well, as a part of the community, we tend, when we get a new tool, to overuse it in the beginning, reminding you of script functions, custom functions, SQL statements that we overused, and then finally, well, we should use it at these times. Have you any experience in which areas you would apply this? Some kind of, it seems like we should use it for data collection, for data transfer, for interaction. So do you have any kind of experience that we can build up and consume before we try it ourselves?
So in the words of Danny Mac, when FileMaker 7 was introduced, one of the best things I heard Danny Mac say at the time was everybody was on the fence, should I convert or should I rebuild? I don't know, I don't know where to rebuild or convert. And Danny said, don't do either. Just learn about the platform and learn what's possible, and then make your decision. Don't just, the community is going to get this. Don't just take open transaction, commit transaction to your script and say, hey, I got a transaction now. It's not going to be like that. You have to understand what you're going to do, right? So it takes some time learning to understand the implications of it. In our case, we've already been doing transactions, and so we're just kind of converting our code to use this model instead. So it's really going to be up to people knowing when to do that. And I think, again, to go back to your question a little bit about when to use it, I think, is that your, again, we use it for all the CRUD operations that we're doing on a system, and we have different ways to do also pre-validation, so that what we're sending we know is clean. So there's other ways that you can also do things where import into a staging table, run validation across those records, if you're doing an import, right? And then send that data over and be transacted. So there's a lot of experimentation that we're going to have to do, and everybody's solutions are different. So any other questions? One more?
Do you always initiate a transaction in a new window?
No. When you start, the step itself, when you start it, you already have implicitly a window that's open, right? That's one window. So when you start it, at that point, it's bound to that window. If inside that transaction, you create a new window, anything you do inside that other window is not part of the transaction.
I understand. My question is, if you go, the new thing here is, in the old days, if you went to another layout, it would commit, and it was not a transaction. So you have to stay still on that record. But as I understand it, this new feature gives a possibility to go to another layout,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
create some
Yeah, yeah.
record, but if some error happens there on another layout, how do you manage to go back so you don't end up, the user don't end up in a obscure layout that they don't have to see?
I mean,
And if you always create a new window and just close that window if anything goes wrong, there is a possibility that the user locking themselves if they have just edited something on the record and then start a transaction on the same record.
yeah. So like if it's running locally, those are challenges you'll have to think about. But our paradigm is we're never running locally. We're running on server. The script aborts, it just aborts, it returns an error, and the user is right where they were. They never left anywhere. So it depends on if you run it locally, then you have to take into consideration, like, okay, the user got, I create an off-screen window, I start my transaction, and then it's running there. If it aborts, close that window, the user is back to where they started because you did it in an off-screen window, kind of like running on the server. Yes, one last question, or anybody? Yeah.
So we have place for one more question, and then we will have to stick around and talk to Vince directly. I'm sorry.
Is there a way to decouple the begin transaction from the commit transaction? Because the one that puzzles me is that you open a transaction, but you cannot really use it to make the user do whatever he wants and then roll back if something goes bad.
So that's the thing, right? Like, so it's not a user transaction, right? So the user isn't allowed, like I turn on a flag and I let the user go to this layout, go to another layout, do the changes. It's not a user transaction, it's within the scope of a script. So you have to have it in the script. And now some people have been talking about like, oh, like just pause the script, but that's the thing that, yeah, I mean, I don't like it so much because there's been some issues with pausing scripts and continuing them, and then other scripts running, and it's just messy. But anyway, so that's it.